Let me give you two specific exercises. All right, I've had some knee issues, and I'm getting pretty low on cartilage. And my orthopedic surgeon told me never to do leg press or no leg extensions. Right, where the weight's resting on your shin, right, and then you're extending all the way up. That for me in particular, and maybe for many people, that's just not a smart exercise because it's going to put too much strain on the front of the knee. What do you think of that particular example?
Yeah, so what you're describing is considered an open chain exercise. So for people that aren't aware of it, it's when someone's sitting, usually in a piece of equipment, and they're really focusing on extending their knee out so their knee locks out and their leg becomes totally straight from their hip to their ankle. And the big problem is if you do have cartilage problem, if you do have knee issues, is you start getting a lot of rubbing when you lock out your knee like that, and that's what is a concern for someone that does have knee problems. So again, the exercise itself is one of those things where it's not typically recommended these days. It used to be a pretty common exercise 20 years ago, but we know a lot more now, and for athletes especially, we prefer to do a lot more closed chain exercises, which means that their feet would be on the ground. So more squatting and lunging type movements would be better for athletes than more of this leg extension type activity. So yeah, the example you gave is one of those ones that gets talked about a lot. So again, there's lots of those situations, but you have to know the athlete, you have to know who you're working with, and there's a lot of exercises that are not appropriate for some athletes that may be very important for others. And that's where the knowledge and skill of the coach becomes really important.
Okay, so for someone with the problems I have, then you're fired. And for most people, that's probably a tired exercise. But if you're wired, then you're doing the closed chain. Then you're wired.
Exactly. I think the better way to phrase this discussion is there's better ways to do things. There aren't right or wrong always. There's better and worse.
Well, and then the other point I'm hearing, too, is that if you're wired, your exercises are prescribed to the person because you know their issues. Correct.
And that's one of the big factors that people really need to have a good analysis, just like we do with strokes in tennis. You want to figure out where are they strong, where are they weak, do they have good or bad technique on certain strokes, and then put a plan in place to fix those. And that's very important with the physical side of the body, especially for tennis players, because of the one-sided nature of tennis. We have a very problematic environment. The human body was never designed to play tennis. So we're creating these imbalances to help us be a good tennis player, but we better spend just as much time taking care of the physical side so we don't cause injury over the long term.
Okay, great. Now, next exercise, sit-ups versus crunches versus something else. Sit-ups are tired or fired?
Again, this is a big debate in the sports training area, is sit-ups, crunches, and, say, plank or isometric type exercises. Those are sort of those areas where there's a big discussion going on at the moment. A lot of researchers are looking at, are there a lot of negatives with doing a lot of sit-up type movements, flexion extension movements they're sometimes called. And there's a school of thought, some well-respected researchers that say athletes should never do sit-ups or even crunches and they should only do isometric type movements, plank holds and different variations of that. The theory behind that is, you've only got so many flexions available in your spine, and you want to save those for your activities. You don't want to overdo them and things like that. The counter argument to it that is that, hey, in every sport or most sports, and let's use tennis as our example, you have to do a lot of flexion extension type movements to hit your shots, to run, to jump, to do overheads, serves, things like that. So you better be strong and you better train those type of movements so that you can handle it during your sport. So the research is out on both sides, and there are strong proponents on either side. My personal analysis, based on the literature, based on the athletes that I work with, is I spend about 70% of my time doing the isometric type movements, the plank variations, and about 30% of my time doing flexion extension movements. So I'm not an all or nothing type of guy. I believe you have to spend more time on more of the isometric or plank type movements.
Well, here's a crazy idea. I mean, what if the bulk of the training was the isometric, but then the warm up before the match was what did you call it? The
flexion extension.
Flexion.
Yeah. No, exactly. And that's definitely appropriate as long as we don't fatigue them too much. The challenge and you don't see this too often in tennis, but in some other sports you actually see where they warm up so much that they actually fatigue out somewhat before they actually get to their sports skill. And very rarely do we see that in tennis. The one area that is a concern, and that's come to a lot, I think, because of this YouTube generation, is the shoulder warm-ups that a lot of people are doing. They see the pros with their, TheraBand or rubber band tubing doing some shoulder exercises before they go practice. And so they go out and then they do a series of shoulder exercises. The thing that a lot of the recreational players don't realize is the pros are just doing a blood flow exercise. They're really just trying to get their shoulder area warm. They're doing it very fast, very quick. Not a lot of fatigue is happening there. But if you go through and do a whole series of shoulder exercises like you would for strengthening purposes, you will actually fatigue the shoulder joint, and that's not something we really want to do if we're going to go out there and then play 2 or 3 hours of tennis. So that's one of those things that we're starting to see quite a bit. A lot of players, parents, coaches are trying to do the right thing, but they're misunderstanding or misreading what's actually needed.
Okay, so that's great, and I think I've done that to myself before also. Now, any final points on exercise done wrong? I mean, because you introduced this as parents are and coaches are even misguided and thinking they're sincere and they think they're doing the right thing. But are there other mistakes or other principles that they should be guided by?
Yeah, most definitely. I think the challenge is, you can't be an expert after reading one article or seeing one video, and that's the concern in this environment. Is that we my biggest thing is make sure that you're not outside your scope of practice or your scope of expertise, and that's a bit of a challenge. I mean, you see it in the coaching community, you see it with parents, you see it in the fitness world, where people try to do everything, and they're not very good at any of those things they're trying, and that's a concern for the athlete. So the big thing that I'd like to see more of is outsource as best you can, at least once or twice. I mean, you don't have to go every week to see someone, but outsource to experts in the areas, whether it's sports psychology, whether it's physical training, whether it's nutrition, and get an expert to help the first or second time to get you on a plan, and then you can work on doing it yourself and implementing it the right way. But that's the biggest problem that I see consistently is well-meaning people are trying to do the right thing. They just have a little bit of knowledge, and you know what they say about, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing, and you see that very much. And that's something I think that can really make a big difference in the development of players as we go forward.